Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why No One Plays. I wasn't kidding when I said half of all champions in Why No One Plays is in the top lane because for today we're going to be talking about yet another top laner, Kennen, the Heart of the Tempest. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, I want to first start off with a disclaimer that my intent behind every episode of Why No One Plays is not to disparage or make fun of the champion in question or those who play him. Obviously, people do play Kennen, but only a very small portion of the community, and my goal with these videos is to raise more awareness of the champion by looking from the perspective of the general player base, those who don't play the champion, and breaking down possible reasons as to why they struggle to see so much usage in solo queue and or pro play as of late. I repeat, I am not hating on Kennen mains, so please do not take this as an indictment on your identity, but with that out of the way, let's get started. Top lane has a wide pool of champions and arguably the most diversity in the game. But in the most broad way we can compartmentalize them, it usually comes down to this: melee top laners and ranged top laners. As you know, top lane consists mostly of fighters, bruisers, and tanks, champions who are generally self-sufficient and can last a long time in lane to make up for the fact that top lane is not only really long, but receives the most minion experience out of any role. That's often the case. You might see a top laner be 3 levels ahead of their opponent with only 3 kills, whereas in the bot lane it would be maybe a level or 2 at most. About 90% of all champions frequently seen up there are melee, since melee champions usually come with those stats, but the remaining 10% consists of the few that can actually hold their own up there. The most common 5 consists of Kennen, Gnar, Teemo, Quinn, and Vladimir. Occasionally you'll see Heimerdinger, Lucian, or Vayne, but they're few and far between. You usually only see those if, let's say, AD carry is autofilled top lane, and Kayle isn't really classified as a ranged top laner since she's melee for most of the early game. Unsurprisingly, you don't see these champions too much, as more often than not they're deployed only as counterpicks to popular top laners. For example, picking Quinn can screw over Mordekaiser, Fiora, Renekton, and stuff like that. Kennen is a special case, as while he has his fair share of advantages against the rest of the cast, people pick him for one reason: his ultimate. Very few champions in this day and age are designed to have an extremely impactful ultimate because of the imbalance of power distributed across the rest of their kit. Despite that, the ones remaining have been able to find reasonable success during their lifetime thanks to having a relatively stable day job whenever it's on cooldown. With champions like Malphite and Fiddlesticks, even though their ultimates are the core essence of their gameplay, they do have another card up their sleeve that can be used to get stuff done. In Malphite's case, he's extremely difficult to deal with as a physical damage dealer since he also scales offensively off of armor, which causes him to deal more damage to you while you deal less damage to him. His easy but powerful trade combo compounded with a constantly regenerating shield allows him to still be threatening even if his ultimate is on cooldown. Fiddlesticks doesn't have the same damage and durability as Malphite, but makes up for it with loads of crowd control, a long-lasting fear on his Q, and an AoE silence on his E. He's also deceptively hard to kill thanks to his drain healing him for ludicrous amounts even at low levels. Both of these champions can apply their basic abilities in the same way with or without their ultimates, and both of them usually conduct their combat in melee range or at least close by. But Kennen is the only super ultimate champion in League of Legends who has a standard playstyle that cannot be performed in conjunction with his ultimate. For the most part, his basic abilities by themselves consist of harassing you from a long range by nailing you with 3 stacks of his passive, which then stuns you so you can't counterattack. It's an effective trade tool in lane, but it requires him to play evasively and keep his distance because most, if not all, melee top laners can make quick work of him due to his frailty. However, his ultimate Slicing Maelstrom requires him to sit directly on top of his opponents. Fortunately, he does receive a respectable boost to his armor and magic resist, so he can soak up a little bit of punishment, but it puts him in the worst position to be once his ultimate is over. Obviously, very few can endure his ultimate and live to tell the tale, especially if he has follow-up from his team. But in terms of the 2 functions he plays, they directly contradict each other because one is all about short trades and keeping distance, while the other entails an all-in strategy where you go smack into the middle of the enemy team. Very few champions in League, if any, switch from ranged to melee or melee to ranged in regards to their trade pattern and all-in. Usually full engages are just an extension of their original trade pattern. For example, with Darius, a standard combo would be E, auto, W reset, and then Q, and that's quite a bit of chip damage to most champions. But if he were to go all in, he would simply just continue chasing them down rather than taking a step back. Kennen's abilities can be casted up close, since Lightning Rush applies a stack of his passive upon contact with enemy units, but he isn't equipped to survive close quarters combat, so it puts you in a situation where you have to be absolutely sure you can either completely destroy your target during the duration of your ultimate, or get them low enough to where you can finish them off with a couple more hits. Having to relinquish your greatest asset as a ranged champion being your range in order to make use of your ultimate is a cost only Kennen and Vladimir to my knowledge have to pay, because other super scary ultimate champions like Yasuo, Fiddlesticks, and Malphite, they want to be in the middle of the enemy team in most circumstances because that's where they're at their strongest. Going in melee range to use such a game-changing ultimate would ordinarily be worth that sacrifice if it wasn't so difficult to get in melee range as Kennen in the first place. Among the champions I listed earlier, Slicing Maelstrom is the only ultimate in the game that requires an external source of mobility to get in, which is usually a combination of Lightning Rush and Hextech Rocket Bell. The only issue with Kennen's ultimate is that it's too easy to see coming. After all, when you're looking at a Kennen charging right towards all 5 of you, you can pretty much assume he's about to press R. Unless going in for a flank or using flash, it simply takes too long for Kennen to get into a prime position for maximum effect. Which is because when he's not looking for a chance to ult you, he stays as far away from enemies as possible to chuck Qs and Ws. So if you see one immediately abandon that strategy and run right towards you, he becomes very predictable. Yasuo's last breath has him teleport to knocked up targets as far as 1400 units away. That's pretty much an entire screen. It makes the enemy team very wary of whoever has displacement crowd control for that reason. You basically have to always assume Yasuo is going to be following up. Fiddlesticks does require time to channel Crowstorm, but because he blinks after casting, it can be used over walls for a surprise attack. A very strong Fiddlesticks can be quite fearsome, no pun intended, for that very reason, requiring the enemy team to place wards everywhere just to know where he is. Malphite is the only other champion who kinda just runs straight at you with his ultimate, but Unstoppable Force has a dash range of 1000 units and moves incredibly fast, so chances are you can't dodge it anyway unless you have flash. Despite having an ultimate arguably stronger than any of his peers, Kennen can be easily peeled off when he tries to get close because anyone with a knockback on the enemy team such as Alistar can preemptively punt him away, which requires him to wait for Lightning Rush to come off cooldown before he can engage again. Part of what makes these ultimates so deadly is that they're not only very dangerous, but most of the time they come out of nowhere. Without any surprise factor, they're actually not all that difficult to deal with. I'm sure Kennen players can attest to the annoyance of having a perfect opportunity to 5-man ult only to get condemned by the enemy Vayne and then there goes all your damage. Which is especially bad on Kennen because the majority of his AoE DPS is his ultimate. Because he lacks any form of protection or sustain to keep him healthy during a fight, and because he doesn't have an easy way to get into the middle of the enemy team, Kennen has to circumvent these problems usually by purchasing items. For those of you who watched Why No One Plays Aurelion Sol, I talked about how item purchases ideally should never be a requirement but rather an incentive. With a few exceptions, they serve to strengthen what is already there rather than make up for what isn't. Item purchases have never been satisfying on Kennen as a result because most of the time it feels like you just have to build things to cover up his weaknesses and not so much augment his strengths. Kennen is a non-mana ability power champion, which back in the day, prior to the item changes in Season 11, prevented him from taking a lot of items that would otherwise be really good on him, such as Rod of Ages to make him beefier, Lichbane for his auto attacks to hit really hard because he does use basic attacks, Luden's Echo for burst damage, Hextech GOP to slow down enemies, things like that. The AP items he had to buy usually were Hextech Protobelt and Zhonya's Hourglass, two items that do synergize really well with this kit, but have low ability power of 60 and 70 respectively. Kennen has very solid AP scaling since all of his abilities not only deal damage, but have AP ratios of 75% or higher. Thing is, he never got to fully capitalize on that because he needs to be faster and tankier. You couldn't really build any of those super high burst AP items like Luden's Echo, Hextech Gunblade, Nashor's Tooth, or Rabadon's Deathcap because 1. You don't use mana so you lose out on a lot of gold value, and 2. You'd have no way to use the majority of that damage since you get one-shotted and have no easy way to get close. Kennen is stuck in a catch-22 where he can't build a lot of damage because he needs to fill in the holes in his kit that really should be filled already. But if he builds those utility items, he loses out overall in DPS. Now that's not to say he still can't do a good amount of damage because... no, he most certainly can. But it goes back to the first problem where he plays like two completely different champions during the neutral game. It all conflicts with each other, essentially turning Kennen into a whack-a-mole type champion where he can only cover one hole at a time and not all of them. Those problems are all bad on their own, but champions always have a few chinks in their armor. It's not like Kennen is the only one with defects and everyone else is perfect. But Kennen suffers from the same problem as his fellow Yordles, Teemo, and Heimerdinger, who are also ranged top laners. They're really good at shutting down threats in lane by hard countering more than half of all melee champions up there, but they can't really do anything else but that. Kennen has a hard time really getting anything done, as his pressure in lane largely depends on how careless or impatient his opponent is. As I mentioned before, Kennen's neutral game consists of harassing you from long range with stun combos and using lightning rush to get away if they ever get fed up with you attacking them and start to charge you down. But aside from that, there's nothing much he can do. If the enemy laner decides to play it safe and let you have the floor, you'll be spending 20 minutes AFK farming in lane because you can't engage, since that's exactly what they want you to do. The only way you can get an advantage is if your opponent gets so tilted from you poking them down that they go after you recklessly at probably half health, which at that point you can just burst them down. Part of the reason Kennen himself can't pressure lane too well is because he simply has no easy wave clear early on. Heimerdinger doesn't really have the ability to start anything, but he can shove the wave into your tower, to the point where whenever you walk up to last hit range creeps, you get hit with a stun grenade and lose half your health, all while you hemorrhage tower plates and gold. Teemo struggles a bit early on, but once he gets his mushrooms, his wave clear matches that of most other top laners. In order for Kennen to push a lane fast, he has to burn Lightning Rush to get marks on all the minions to then use Electrical Surge. But then you use 2 damaging abilities to push the wave and your mobility, which gives your enemy laner an opportunity to strike back. Even though Kennen does a better job at harassing his opponents compared to the likes of Teemo and Heimer, he's much worse at lane control against anyone with an AoE damaging ability like Darius, who ironically beats Kennen because he can just shove waves and permaslow you, which takes away all that bonus movement speed. Kennen's another one of those champions who's simply too honest. I know that sounds terrible. Why is fairness considered a bad thing for a champion? But he always has to give up something in order to achieve something, which in a game like League of Legends makes you not a very fun pick. In the logic of most players, why bother taking 1 step back and 2 steps forward when you can play a champion that lets you just take 2 steps forward and not have to take a step back at all? In terms of game design, Kennen is a very fair champion with clear strengths and clear weaknesses, but in any competitive game, players do not care about playing fairly. They do whatever it takes to win. Even if it means using cheap tricks or cheese tactics, if it shows them a victory screen at the end of the game, it's worth it. I guess what I'm trying to say is that most of the community sees Kennen as too weak to play because he's strong, but he's too balanced and has too much counterplay. They would rather play someone who has very little counterplay than someone who has no counterplay, because why would you willingly give your opponents a weakness to exploit? Fortunately for him, aside from his conflicting playstyles, this could easily be fixed with just a few quality of life buffs. I'm sure a lot of players would be happy to take a damage cut on his ultimate if Riot just made it easier for him to get into the enemy team, because then that removes your need for a Proto Belt and you can buy a more bursty mythic like Night Harvester or something like that. I personally really hate Kennen because I'm a top main, so I never want him to see the light of day, but for the sake of this video and just to maintain objectivity, I feel like a cool thing you could do for Slicing Maelstrom is allow Kennen to dash to targets with marks on them. For example, if they have 1 stack, Kennen can dash right on top of them from 300 units away. And if they have 2 stacks, it doubles to 600, which is the standard dash range for most champions. So what you could do is toss an auto attack and then a Q on a tank stepping up too far, and then use Lightning Rush to cover the last bit of range to strike the enemy team. In exchange, we can lower the damage on his ultimate by maybe 20 or 30%. Kennen has so much damage potential, but he just has no effective way to deal it, and I'm willing to bet money a lot of Kennen mains are more than happy to lose a little bit of that damage in exchange for just quality of life changes to the champion. So that's all I have to say about Kennen. If you have any ideas on how to fix him, then let me know in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, a rating would be much appreciated, and if you'd like to see more content like this, please be sure to subscribe. Also check out the video description down below for links to my Discord and social media, as well as a playlist containing all of my past episodes of Why No One Plays if you feel like binge watching. But for now, that's it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for the next video. Take care.